Welcome back, folks, to another edition of my WrestleRant series where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watch on the WWE Network. Over the course of the month of September, I'm going to be reviewing every installment of the Night of Champions pay-per-view. I've already talked about the 07, 08, and 09 editions. Today, I'll be talking about the 2010 edition, and personally, my favorite Night of Champions event of all time. Now, I might be a bit biased here. Maybe it's just my experience with this pay-per-view. But the Night of Champions 2010 pay-per-view was the second ever pay-per-view I've ordered in my history of being a wrestling fan, the first being the 2010 Royal Rumble show. So, I wasn't really planning on buying the show beforehand. It was only literally minutes before the show went live, and I called up my mom, who was not home at the time, and I asked her if I could buy this pay-per-view. She said yes, half-heartedly, not knowing what the price would be, and $50, $60 for the pay-per-view. But nevertheless, so I was really excited for it. We had Kane versus Undertaker for the World Heavyweight Championship, a six-pack challenge for the WWE title, Daniel Bryan versus The Miz, a match that I was very much looking forward to. It was a great card on paper. And Night of Champions, dating back to 2008, has always been one of my favorite pay-per-views of the year. Not so much anymore because it's been kind of watered down in recent years, especially last year's edition, 2013. Now Money in the Bank, the Royal Rumble, even TLC or Extreme Rules have kind of taken that place of being my favorite pay-per-view of the year. But nevertheless, though, that was kind of one of the leading factors in me buying this pay-per-view. And it was a great idea by WWE to put all the titles on the line, in that it is a big drawing point for many fans. So that was kind of one of the leading factors why I bought this pay-per-view, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I was glad I did. I DVR'd it, which was a smart idea on my part. I actually bought the 2013 Royal Rumble show as well and forgot to DVR that show, so that was a dumb decision by me. Not because I didn't want to DVR, I just kind of forgot. So it was very smart of me to DVR it because I went back and watched it a number of months down the line. Now you can watch it on the WWE Network, so this is my first time watching this show back in, and I think about a year or two, and I very much enjoyed it. So running down the card here, for the Intercontinental Championship, Dolph Ziggler versus Kofi Kingston. And this is a match that we had seen numerous times going into the show, as Kofi Kingston had lost the IC Championship to Dolph Ziggler on an episode of SmackDown in early August. Kofi Kingston had tried to win back the IC title from Dolph Ziggler at every opportunity, losing to, or the match at SummerSlam actually went to a no contest. He beat Ziggler by countout. He beat him by DQ on subsequent editions of SmackDown leading into Night of Champions, leading to the stipulation of this matchup. And I originally thought it was a no-holds-barred match, but it wasn't. I just remember, I remember as a no-holds-barred match, but it was not. The stipulation was that if Dolph Ziggler had got himself disqualified or counted out, he would have lost the Intercontinental Championship. So it was a nice, interesting twist to this feud between Kingston and Ziggler. These two have encountered one another so many times over the years, but their matches are so great every single time. I would go so far as to say Ziggler's best opponent is Kingston, and vice versa, because these two always work so well together. And it was a great idea to have them kick off the show. Vicky Guerrero in Dolph Ziggler's corner almost at one point tried to slap Kingston. Ziggler said, no, don't get me DQ'd. So that was a nice touch on the matchup, added to the stipulation that if he got DQ'd, he would have lost the championship. So a very good matchup from these two. Ended up getting 12 minutes of in-ring time. I think the only matches that would get that much time were the U.S. title match, the World Heavyweight title, and the WWE title matches as well. So it was really cool for that matchup to get enough time to really shine, and the potential that it had to be to live up to that. So great match to kick off the show. Dolph Ziggler is still the Intercontinental Champion. Would go on to reign as IC Champion for another few more months until losing it back to Kofi Kingston, coincidentally enough. But Ziggler, in my mind, was one of the better Intercontinental Champions in the last 5 years, and this was a great example of that, with a great title defense against Kofi Kingston on this show. Up next, we had our first ever non-title matchup in Night of Champions history. Why it was added to the card, I have no idea. It was only 4 minutes long. I think the shortest matchup on the show, shorter than the One Divas match on the show. It was the Big Show versus CM Punk. Now, the story going into this feud, going into this matchup, was that CM Punk and Big Show had been feuding since July. Big Show had been feuding the Straight Edge Society, defeating Joey Mercury, CM Punk, and Luke Gallows, squashing them in a 3-on-1 handicap match at SummerSlam. I thought that was a mistake. That kind of marked the death of the Straight Edge Society. They were kind of already on the downfall before this. They were already kind of on that down spiral, but this really solidified that, the burial, so to speak, of the Straight Edge Society. Also, in an episode of SmackDown, Big Show had beaten Luke Gallows and CM Punk in a 2-on-1 handicap matchup. So at Night of Champions, CM Punk, screw it. he said, screw it, I'm going to go out alone against Big Show one-on-one. So the interesting twist of this matchup and why I liked it so much, not the matchup itself, but the promo that CM Punk cut beforehand. It was the pay-per-view took place in his hometown of Chicago, and this was long before that people were saying, oh, Chicago is one of the hottest crowds, one of the hottest wrestling crowds. I mean, people knew that it was a historic wrestling crowd and all the history behind the history of Chicago and everything that's happened there over the last number of decades in wrestling. But it wasn't really until the 2011 Money in the Bank pay-per-view that people would start saying that Chicago was so awesome. But that being said, though, it was before this matchup that CM Punk came down to cut a promo. Crowd went crazy for Punk, despite the fact that he was still a heel. He said, I love Chicago. I love the pizza. I love the scenery. I love the weather. But what I hate, what I despise about Chicago is the inhabitants of Chicago, of my beautiful city. I hope it burns down to the ground for a second time for great heat. Some people still cheered him anyway, but it was a great promo. And CM Punk was so awesome in that sense of being a heel, and that even as a heel, he wasn't looking for that cheap pop where he praises the city that he's from, thus causing the babyface to get booed. No, he's an old school heel in that he would try so desperately to get people to turn against him, but in turn, he was so great as a heel that people had no choice but to cheer him because he was so fucking awesome. And this is a perfect example of that. And this is one of my favorite CM Punk promos ever. I thought this was terrific. But anyway, like I said, the match would last all of 4 minutes. Big Show would defeat CM Punk. CM Punk was pretty much on the down spiral by this point. I was not surprised with what he had to say on his DVD about the Straight Edge Society dying a slow death in this feud of the Big Show. He never pinpointed the feud of the Big Show as being the death of the SES, but it really was, in my mind. He would go on to become a member of the Raw roster a short period after this. Thankfully so, because it would relaunch his career as a member of the New Nexus and the whole leaving the WWE as champion thing, and so on and so forth. The rest is history. But anyway, though, a brief squash match on the show that was not all that necessary, but that promo was well worth it. Up next, for the United States Championship, Daniel Bryan challenging the then United States Champion, The Miz. Now, what I love so much about this matchup, and I'll tell you a brief story. Going into this matchup, actually even a month before this, it had been announced, and I have been a faithful follower of the Northeast Wrestling indie organization since 2009. They announced in August, right before the SummerSlam pay-per-view, before he made his return to WWE, that Daniel Bryan would be present at one of their events in October. Okay, so with that being said, I was really excited. Now knowing that Daniel Bryan, being a part of the WWE and being the gracious guy that he is, and WWE being nice enough to allow Daniel Bryan to fulfill his indie dates, and I believe that show that I went to in August, in October of that year, and I'll go in depth on a video on this in another time. I think in early October I'll be talking about it in a random video blog and how I met Daniel Bryan. But Daniel Bryan was going to be present at one of their indie events in early October, and this pay-per-view was happening only weeks before that show. So had Daniel Bryan won here, I would be meeting the current United States Champion. That meant a lot to me, seeing how the U.S. Championship, not so much anymore, but it was always one of my favorite titles. I love the lineage. I love the people that held it. I love the look of the championship. I loved everything about that title. It has always been, maybe not so much anymore, like I said, but it has always been one of my favorite titles in the WWE. So for Daniel Bryan, of all people, a guy who just came back to the WWE, to be holding that title when I met him at that indie event a couple of weeks later, would have been surreal. So I was really pushing for Daniel Bryan to win that title on this show, and he did. The video package that played before the contest was great, and the story going into this contest, everything about this feud was so fucking well booked. From the history between Daniel Bryan and The Miz, to everything on the Raws leading into the show. Miz would get the upper hand, then Daniel Bryan would get the upper hand. Everything that happened at SummerSlam on NXT. It was so fucking well booked. It's easily one of my favorite feuds of all time, believe it or not. And if I was to make a top 10 list of my favorite matches of all time, this match would be on it. It wasn't a 5-star classic by any means, and it wasn't one of Daniel Bryan's best matches in WWE if you put it up against the matches against CM Punk and Sheamus and others. But in terms of monumental moments and making his career, this matchup I would definitely argue would be on that list. In that it was his first matchup. It was the first match in which he won his first singles title in the WWE. It was a very well-wrestled matchup, and give Miz as much shit as you want for being a crappy in-ring wrestler, but he really showed the full potential that he's capable of having in this matchup with Daniel Bryan. One can argue that, Daniel Bryan carried him to a great matchup, but it takes two to tango. That's at least my philosophy. It takes two to tango when it comes to in-ring action. And I thought these two had a hell of a matchup on this show. And the best part about it is that they never really had a rematch. They had one more match in, I think, February of 2011 on an episode of Raw. An equally great matchup. And they also met in a triple threat match at Hell in a Cell a couple of weeks later. But this was their one and only encounter in the fall of 2010. And they were rookies/pros together on NXT Season 1. And Daniel Bryan had taken the place of The Miz on the team of WWE at SummerSlam 2010. So everything about this matchup I really, really enjoyed. Like I said, very well wrestled. It got 12 minutes of in-ring time. Alex Riley at ringside was a great addition. You always had that thought in the back of your mind, is Alex Riley going to interfere and help Miz retain? Is he going to help him get DQ'd? Is this matchup going to end in a disqualification or a countout? That thought was always in the back of your mind when you were watching this matchup. So for Daniel Bryan to take out Alex Riley at ringside, lock in the LaBelle Lock, as it was called at the time, and make The Miz tap out and the crowd goes crazy in Chicago, no less, that same city that Daniel Bryan would win his first Money in the Bank briefcase at in 2011, no less than a year later, was absolutely surreal. And I love the moment. I remember marking the fuck out when Daniel Bryan became the U.S. champion. It was a really cool moment. I love this matchup. I really enjoyed the action. So it was great showings from both Miz and Daniel Bryan on this show. So absolutely one of the highlights of the night for me personally. So up next we had the unification of the WWE Women's Championship and the WWE Divas Championship. I guess they decided, hell, this brand split's kind of dying a death, and it would officially die out about a year later. But the women's divisions on both shows, on SmackDown and Raw respectively, were really dying out. We really didn't have much wrestlers in terms of women's wrestlers on both Raw and SmackDown to keep it separate. So they said, fuck with it, let's just unify them. No one really cared. The titles hadn't meant anything in a long time. But it was a cool rematch from Night of Champions 2009, and with the matchup being Michelle McCool versus Melina, even though Layla was the official women's champion, but whatever. It was still a cool clash of a rematch from Night of Champions the year prior. And even Matt Striker on commentary pointed that out. And him, Michael Cole, and Lawler, I always thought were a great trio on commentary, despite the fact that Lawler and Striker would try to bring, Lawler and Cole would try to bring Striker down all the time on commentary. That always kind of annoyed me a little bit, given his passion for the product. But he was always great on commentary. I miss him on commentary. I miss him in WWE. But anyway, though, a good matchup for Michelle McCool and Melina. Like their matchup the year before, only got about 6 minutes. Still a well-wrestled matchup. It was a Lumberjills matchup. I thought that point of it was really pointless. Given the fact, I guess their mindset was that, hey, lay cool, everyone hates you, so we're going to try to stack the odds against you by putting every diva that you've abused, that you made fun of, that you've embarrassed over the last year or so at ringside to prevent you from winning the championship. And that backfired because McCool won anyway. So that being said, the Lumberjills basically did nothing. It was almost to the point of being comical. I remember when they announced the Lumberjills and Jillian came out, and Matt Striker, I don't know if it was Matt Striker or Michael Cole, I think it might have been Matt Striker, who said, Jillian is still here? And that made me, it was LOL fun. It was laugh out loud worthy, in that she would end up getting released about a month or two later anyway, but she was never even on fucking TV, so Matt Striker didn't even know that she was still a part of the company, so I thought that was comical. But anyway, though, the Lumberjills did nothing, to the point where Michelle McCool and Melina would get thrown out to ringside, and the Lumberjills wouldn't even touch them. They had a bunch of fights and stuff. They were brawling a bunch of times. Rosa Mendez, a women's wrestler, a diva, that has never won a fucking match in WWE. Only one match she has won via disqualification, and that's it. In her 6 years with WWE. I still laugh about it to this day. But she was brawling with someone at ringside, and she had completely missed all the punches that she was throwing. Like I said, it was to the point of absolute hilarity that that Rosa Mendez wasn't even attempting to try to fight with the other divas at ringside. So this matchup was just one giant laughing stock. McCool would come out victorious as the unified WWE Divas and Women's Champions, also sharing that title with Layla before they would eventually drop it to Natalya at Survivor Series that year. So decent matchup, but it was entertaining for all the wrong reasons. Up next, we had the World Heavyweight Championship matchup between the Undertaker and Kane, not the Kane. Kane and Undertaker. It was no holds barred for the World Heavyweight title. And I really like the promo going into this, and the line about with Kane saying, "I know you better than anyone, brother." Not Hulk Hogan, brother, but and saying that he knew him so well, he knew what he was capable of, he knew what to expect from the Dead Man going into this contest. And the no holds barred stipulation really helped benefit this bout. And the Undertaker, this was really when they started to tell the story that he doesn't have it anymore. He's not 100%. And this was around the time that he really became a part-timer. He came back at SummerSlam 2010, did this feud with Kane, disappeared for a while. Not intentionally, but only because he was injured for a while as well. So with that being said, the benefit, the stipulation of this being a no-holds-barred matchup really helped benefit both guys. And the Undertaker really couldn't go at the same pace that he used to. So they really brawled around the arena. It wasn't a 5-star classic, but for a matchup involving Kane and Undertaker in 2010, I thought this was pretty damn good. They threw in a few cool spots there. I'm sorry, my computer died. This happens every single fucking video, but it died again. Anyway, they threw in a few spots in there that were pretty innovative, kept it entertaining, kept the pace consistent. So I was entertained by this matchup for the most part. And the most surprising part about it was that Kane came out on top. I didn't know if Kane had ever been able to defeat The Undertaker before this. I'm sure he did at one point in the Attitude Era. But for the most part, Undertaker had always won every feud that they had together going into this matchup. So for Kane to come out victorious, still the World Heavyweight Champion, was a pleasant surprise, albeit clean. I mean, it was a clean loss. It's clear as day. That was very cool as well. So that being said, was entertained by this matchup, really enjoyed the outcome, kept the feud alive, going into Hell in a Cell, which would also bring back the return of Paul Bearer in their feud as well, before he turned heel at Hell in a Cell, and I'll get to that at another point when I review the Hell in a Cell pay-per-views. But good matchup from Kane and Undertaker. Like I said, not a 5-star mat classic, but for a brawling bout, I thought it was very good. Up next, a tag team turmoil matchup for the WWE Tag Team titles. At this point in time in 2010, the tag titles were given very little spotlight or focus, to the point where people didn't even know that the Hart Dynasty were still tag team champions. They never defended the titles. They had a good feud going with the Usos, but after that died out, they really did nothing as tag team champions. So the decision to take the titles off of them here at the show was a good one. The tag team turmoil match was, people were even questioning. I remember reading like the reports and stuff. People were like, are we even going to get a tag team title match at Night of Champions? I mean, I know every title's supposed to be on the line, but no match has been announced for the tag team titles. So officials were like, fuck it, let's just put them in a tag team turmoil matchup, not even care. So that's what they did. And they threw in teams like the Usos, who got 2 straight victories. And the Hart Dynasty came out first with the Usos, and the Usos beat them. So the Hart Dynasty didn't even make it to the final few teams. They didn't even make it through. They were the first team eliminated, and they were the current or then reigning tag team champions. So that was a bit weird, and like, not the ultimate burial of the Hart Dynasty, but it kind of it was a factor in their eventual split a couple of months later. But anyway, that was a bit weird. We got also teams like Evan Bourne and Mark Henry, Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre, who would win the belts on the show, Santino and Kozlov. So for the most part, this matchup compromised or consisted of teams that were really makeshift tag teams, and not the real tag teams in tandem that I thought were going to be on the show, like Vance Archer and Kurt Hawkins, who I thought were very entertaining before they ultimately split up for no reason a couple of months later. The Dude Busters, Trent Beretta and Kalen Croft, were nowhere to be seen in this matchup. Why? I have no idea. So that was a bit weird in favor of guys like Evan Bourne and Mark Henry, who weren't really a tag team at all. So Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre, sure, giving them the tag team titles was something fresh. It was new. They didn't really have any reason to be tag team together, aside from the fact they weren't doing anything as singles guys. But even that tag team bombed. They held the titles for all of a month before dropping them to John Cena and David Otunga, of all people, a part of the Nexus. So that was really a waste of time, and I didn't really see the point in taking the titles off the Hart Dynasty in the first place. At least do something with them. I enjoy Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre as much as the next guy, and they could have made a very fun tandem, but they never had any promo segments. They never really explained why they were tag teaming in the first place. They never really had any successful title defenses whatsoever before they dropped them to Cena and Otunga about a month later. So that was really weird. The matchup was really nothing of note. People got excited for the final few minutes of the Bourne Henry McIntyre Rhodes matchup, but aside from that, no one really cared because the tag team division was so dead at this point in time that no one gave 2 shits whatsoever. So we get to the main event, six-pack challenge for the WWE Championship. I love the fact that it was elimination style that made it more exciting, unlike the '07 edition. And it's funny now, thinking back on it, I didn't realize that until just now, in 2007 Night of Champions at Vengeance Night of Champions, we had a 5-pack match for the WWE title, not elimination. We had a 6-pack matchup for the U.S. Championship at Night of Champions 2009. And now we had another 6-pack matchup at Night of Champions 2010. So a lot of pack matches, I guess, or multi-man matches for the titles on the show. And because I can see why, every matchup is supposed to be a title matchup, and they don't really do many non-title matches at Night of Champions. So they want to include as many matches many superstars as possible on this pay-per-view. So they just group them together in multi-man matches. So I understand that. And one aspect of this match that I really, really liked was the fact that every individual, every competitor, combatant in this contest got some promo time before this matchup. Randy Orton, Chris Jericho, Wade Barrett, Sheamus, John Cena, and Edge all had a chance to talk about why they wanted to win the title before this matchup. And it was spread out nicely over the course of the show. And my favorite promo of all of them had great promos. Jericho acting like his cocky dick self, I thought was great. He was so fucking great as a heel. Even in 2010, '08 was his year as a heel, but '09 and even 2010, he was awesome. This was only a couple of weeks before he left the company again for a brief hiatus before coming back in 2012. But my favorite promo from these 6 guys on the show was with John Cena, of all people. He was so great. He was like, there's this percentage chance of Randy Orton hitting an RKO, this percentage chance that Edge is not rated R anymore. It's TV, PG, folks. It's so great. He was saying that and that and that. He was like, there's a 45% chance that the crowd will be hostile tonight. And he looks over at the crowd, or not at the crowd because this is backstage, but he looks out in the corner of the camera, and you can hear the Chicago crowd booing John Cena. And then he goes, okay, 75% chance. And that had me laughing out loud, just dying of laughter. John Cena, when he's focused, I know I like him when he's more serious and when there's more serious promos, but it's small stuff like that, and for the most part, his comedy is complete, kid-oriented, but stuff like that really made me laugh, so I thought that was a great line. But anyway, we get to the matchup. Jericho is eliminated within the first minute or two, and it was heavily rumored, and Jericho never really made this official going in and out of Champions. It was just kind of something that he touched upon and never really made official, was that had he not been able to win the WWE title match on this show, he would have left. He would have quit. And although he was eliminated within the first few minutes of this matchup, which really added to the aspect of anything can happen, and no one saw it coming whatsoever, he would not leave for another few more weeks. I think he left maybe 8 days later after a loss to Randy Orton. I think I recall that correctly. But that was pretty cool for Jericho. I mean, I would have liked to see him last longer. But his quick elimination added to the matchup in that you got this feel that anything could happen. It was unpredictable. So that being said, a lot of the action in this matchup was very entertaining. The guys took turns and, having 2 people in the ring at a time, but for the most part, they kept things consistent. They kept the flow going. The Nexus would interfere at one point and help Wade Barrett defeat John Cena, eliminate him from the matchup. So that was a big win for Wade Barrett. And I know that their momentum really died out at SummerSlam a month prior, and the Nexus was never really the same after that, even though they would recruit John Cena to Hell in a Cell, and that would end up backfiring as well. But that was a big win for Wade Barrett on the show, something that a lot of people overlook more often than not, that Wade Barrett pinned John Cena on this show. The Nexus didn't even touch John Cena, or they might have, I'm not really sure. But Wade Barrett capitalized from the distraction from the Nexus, pinned John Cena, and got the victory. And then it came down to Barrett, Sheamus, and Orton. A lot of people knew that Orton was already winning. It came down to Orton and Sheamus, who had to... Actually, it didn't really come down to Orton and Sheamus at all. Orton eliminated Barrett, and then before Sheamus could hit the bro kick, in which he did, and he got that close two count, and that he hit the bro kick, a move that a lot of people did not kick out of at the time, and still don't to this day. It's a rarity that you see someone kick out of the bro kick, and the crowd went crazy when Randy Orton kicked out of it. He would eventually hit the RKO, and Sheamus and Orton worked so well together that I was a bit disappointed that they didn't have more time to interact, but the matchup was already going on 22 minutes as it is, so I'm not really surprised that they didn't, incorporate more moves, because they would eventually do that in their Hell in a Cell match a couple of weeks later. But Randy fucking Orton, and I said this on Twitter a couple of months ago, or a couple of days ago when I watched the show, he was so freaking over at the time that Randy Orton was so great at being a babyface at this point in time, and the lack of armbands and stuff like that. He just came off to me before this matchup. Over the course of the summer of 2010, I really got the feel, and no one could be the next anyone. Like, no one could be the next Shawn Michaels or the next Hulk Hogan. But I felt like he was this generation's version of John Cena. Not John Cena. Like, of Stone Cold Steve Austin. He felt like this badass motherfucker that you didn't want to, that you didn't want to go up against. He was so rebellious. He didn't speak much. That was probably to his benefit because he was so monotone on the microphone. That was really his downfall for his babyface run. But in 2010, he was so freaking over. Randy Orton, it blows my mind. I remember him being so over, but I completely forgot about it until watching this show. Just how over he was, and the crowd went crazy when he won the WWE title. I think his 6th WWE Championship, if I recall correctly, or a 6th world title overall. And there was, you could visually see there was not one person booing when he won the WWE title. Completely a complete 180 from all these years later. And I noted this on Twitter. I was having a back and forth with someone on Twitter a couple of days ago when I was talking about this. That, can you name the real downfall of the babyface character of Randy Orton, and that people started to turn on him? And it came across to me that the point where people started to turn on Randy Orton was when he beat Christian in 2 days for that world title. And he never really has gotten that same fan support since. Even as a heel, in late 2009, people were cheering him because they loved him so much. He was so great as a heel. But nowadays, people don't really get that same feel because Randy Orton really isn't that same guy that he was so many years ago. And he does have his moments nowadays, but he really isn't that same guy. But anyway, though, he was so over. The bottom line is that, no pun intended, he was so over in 2010 that he came across to me as like a Stone Cold Steve Austin of the WWE at this point in time. That I wanted to see a dream match between Randy Orton and Stone Cold. So many years later, nowadays, maybe not so much. I would much rather see Punk and Austin. But Austin and Stone Cold, or Austin and Orton would have had a hell of a matchup in 2011, 2010 when Austin was still, I keep on mixing Austin and Orton up, when Orton was still so fucking over with the crowd. And then we're so happy to see him win that WWE title on the show. So it was a great way to close off the show. I still considered myself a fan of Randy Orton at the time. He wasn't my favorite wrestler or anything, but I was still a fan of him at the time. And I think that, that whole feud with Christian in 2011 was really the death of him. And it wasn't his fault. I don't blame him whatsoever. It was just the booking, and that Christian lost the world title in 2 days, or 5 days if you count TV time, but 2 days in real time, given the SmackDown taping, whatever. But that being said, though, I don't attribute that that's not his fault whatsoever. It was more of the booking of that feud, and I know it added to the Christian heel turn, and had he lost in a month or two later, it wouldn't have had that same impact. But that's when people, in my mind, really started to turn on Randy Orton. But you go back to the show, he was so goddamn over. It's so much fun to see. But a great way to close off the show. A very entertaining show, in my opinion. The 2012 show I thought was also very, very good. And maybe I love the show so much because I have great memories of it, with it being my second ever pay-per-view that I've ever ordered. So maybe that's why Night of Champions was my favorite pay-per-view at the time. But absolutely, I give the show 2 thumbs up. The best Night of Champions show I've watched to this point in terms of, in comparison to the 07, 08, 09, and 2010 shows. I thought this pay-per-view was very, very good. I very much enjoyed it. So, great stuff here. Matches to watch from this show. Kane and Undertaker was solid, but not really must-see. They would have better matches anyway. The main event I thought was very entertaining, so go out of your way to watch the 6-pack challenge for the WWE title. Daniel Bryan and The Miz, absolutely go out of your way to watch. Great matchup. And Ziggler versus Kofi Kingston was also a very good matchup as well. And don't forget about CM Punk's promo in Chicago. A phenomenal promo from the straight edge savior, CM Punk. So, yeah, absolutely. I don't know what I would rate this pay-per-view out of 10. Maybe an 8, a 7.5, maybe even an 8.5, because I thought this show was very, very well booked. Very newsworthy in that we had 4 new champions crowned, a new Unified Divas champion, new WWE champion, new tag team champions, and new US champion. But very much enjoyed the pay-per-view when it initially aired. Watching it back, I enjoyed it as well. So I would absolutely recommend you go back and watch this pay-per-view, Night of Champions 2010, on the WWE Network. So, That's going to do it for my review of the 2010 installment of Night of Champions. Thanks, guys, for watching. I really do appreciate it. As always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be back in a couple more days with my review of the 2011 installment of Night of Champions. In the meantime and in between time, I'm Graham Jason Matthews, and I'll catch you guys then.